Before the first coin flip, before the first kickoff, you just gotta check out the Sideline Sizzle with the youngest sports commentator in American radio. Here's Tristan Blackman with the Sideline Sizzle.
Welcome to another edition of the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department and the Biddle Law Firm. We've been covering my predictions for each team in the upcoming 2023 NFL regular season. So far, we've gone through several divisions, but have yet to cover the NFC or AFC South divisions. Today, we will cover the NFC South, but first, we surprisingly have a great deal of news to cover. We'll kick things off with the news surrounding Denver Broncos defensive lineman Ioma Uwazurike. With a name like that, you may or may not have heard of this guy. It's okay if you haven't. His name stands out more than his actual play on the field. I forgot this guy even played for the Broncos. He's mostly a depth player on the defensive line and a fairly young player as well. Anyway, the long list of players who have begun to get suspensions from the NFL as a result of gambling is growing larger. Back in June, we saw players from the Indianapolis Colts fall victim to the sports betting suspension spree. There have been plenty of other names in the NFL having been suspended as well, such as Quintez Cephas, Jamison Williams, Shaka Toney, and many more. Not that all these names are star players or anything, but my goodness, it's absurd, the amount of names. Uwazurike is the most recent player to have been given a suspension as a result of violating the NFL's sports gambling policy. The sports betting policy, up to my knowledge, prohibits betting on NFL games or betting on any sports events while within any team or league facility. The rules don't make sense to me. I understand, to a degree, not betting on NFL games, but not betting on any sports games while in a league facility? Why does it matter whether or not they're in the facility? That's just absurd to me. And I wouldn't have nearly as much of a problem as I do with the NFL's sports gambling policies if it weren't for the unrelenting amount of marketing and advertising they've done with sports betting outlets like FanDuel, for instance. The NFL contradicts themselves all the time. They don't mind when companies like FanDuel are one of their biggest sponsors, but then on the other hand, they denounce gambling and sports bets, especially among active players. Some of these players aren't even signed to NFL teams yet and are already facing league suspensions. Several free agents have been suspended for violating the gambling policy, and they aren't even likely to play in an NFL game, period. Sometimes I just feel like the NFL really channels their energy into the wrong places sometimes. Then again, what do I know? I'm just a guy on the radio talking about football. As of now, Uwazurike's suspension is an indefinite suspension, so to speak. While his absence isn't likely to severely impact the Denver Broncos, I still disagree with players being suspended multiple games for violating the league's policy in seemingly minor and borderline irrelevant ways. Moving on, there were several signings and contract-related news that broke within the past week. For starters, the Raiders managed to add a talented piece to their secondary in former Ravens defensive back Marcus Peters. Vegas has struggled in that particular area of their defense, their most talented defensive back being Nate Hobbs. Funnily enough, I've seen many delusional Raiders fans, yes I mean it, delusional Raiders fans, calling Nate Hobbs a better defensive back than the Denver Broncos defensive back Patrick Surtain. Just look up the stats, or maybe even watch a game or two, and then come back and tell me with a straight face that Nate Hobbs is the better corner. Newsflash, he's not, and never will be. Not to say he's a bad defender, he's actually a talented corner, but he's nowhere close to Surtain's level of play. Anyway, Peters should help out a struggling Raiders defense who has yet to improve that area of their defense in a significant way for quite some time. While the Raiders were out making moves in free agency this week, the New Orleans Saints managed to make a splash of their own. I might argue that it was a very insignificant splash. I'd call it more of a ripple, if that. The Saints brought back tight end Jimmy Graham, who played for them back in 2010 to 2014, which included his rookie season. I've always considered Graham a bit of a journeyman at tight end, but in reality, he's only played for 4 NFL teams, the Saints being his longest tenure on a single team. Now, for New Orleans, I guess this is a decent move. I don't really know. I personally thought Graham was retired and more interested in piloting airplanes than catching footballs. I suppose he changed his mind. He did not play in 2022 because there wasn't a team out there willing to sign the old guy. Graham is 36 years old and will be entering his 13th season in the NFL. His last season where he saw the field was in 2021 on the Chicago Bears, where he played in 15 games and caught just 14 passes for 167 yards and 3 touchdowns. With those numbers in mind, I don't think Graham will really do anything for the Saints. To me, this reunion is probably just to get the fans hyped up because, in reality, this looks like a depth signing. Ever since Graham left the Saints following the 2014 season, New Orleans has yet to have maintained a true number one tight end that met the standards set by Graham. Currently, most Saints fans would regard Graham as the best tight end they've had in franchise history. Well, maybe not most fans, I don't know, but personally, I would rank Graham at number 1. Now, just because he's probably the best tight end New Orleans has had in recent years, does not mean he's the same player now. At the end of the day, this signing is probably not going to solve their needs at tight end. The last signing we will look at comes from the New York Giants, who have been having a standoff with running back Saquon Barkley. Barkley had an impressive bounce-back season in 2022, where he didn't battle many injuries over the course of the season like he usually has. Saquon was hoping to get a pretty big payday, but instead got the franchise tag. However, this past week, Barkley finally agreed to a one-year deal with the Giants, who were rumored to have tried trading him away. Barkley is arguably the most talented piece on their offense, and trading him away would probably be a dumb move for them. Sadly, the running back market has become so absurd that even the most talented of running backs struggle to make a big payday. Barkley is one of those backs, and his one-year deal that he most recently signed is only worth up to $11 million. Next, we will look at my predictions for the NFC South in the 2023 regular season. That will be here sooner than later, but before we do that, I'd like to mention that throughout this week, the NFL has released their list of the top 100 players in the NFL. I think this list is a total joke each and every year, as players like Mac Jones once made it on this list, believe it or not. No disrespect to Mac, but sometimes I lack confidence that he would even make it into the top 100 players of his division. Anyway, let's look at the NFC South, starting with the first team we'll focus on in the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons really struggled to gain a lot of traction in 2022. Their offense was very mediocre, and with top picks like Kyle Pitts not living up to expectations, this team relied heavily on the run game. They started Marcus Mariota at quarterback, and he didn't even last the full season as their starter. I was a big fan of his early on. I was really rooting for the guy, but his play around midseason was just so awful. And for the Falcons, I'm unsure that Desmond Ridder is the answer to their needs at quarterback. What I am sure of is that they have a great running game with Tyler Algier, the newly acquired Bijan Robinson, and a name that many seem to forget about, Cordell Patterson. They do still have Kyle Pitts and Drake London as well, and their offensive line is sneakily one of the top units in the NFL, I'd say. All they need to do is cap off such a versatile offense with a good quarterback, and maybe Desmond Ridder brings that. Personally, I'm just a Desmond Ridder doubter. He's coming out of a very weak quarterback class, and there are a lot of doubts surrounding him as it stands, so my prediction for the Falcons may end up surprising some of you, and if Ridder plays well, they could do even better than I have predicted here. Starting in Week 1, the Falcons open their season against the Carolina Panthers. This will be a tight opening game for sure, as these two rival teams usually keep games close. I do have the Falcons winning this one, though. I have faith they can get it done early against a young rookie quarterback in Bryce Young. Moving on to Week 2 for the Falcons, they face the Green Bay Packers. This is another fresh quarterback who is getting his first taste of being a full-time starter in the NFL, like Bryce Young. Jordan Love will be in his third season, though. He's had time to sit behind a future Hall of Famer. He's been waiting patiently on the bench, and now he finally gets a guaranteed opportunity to go and play. The Packers really don't have much else at quarterback other than Jordan Love, so he's been given the keys to this Green Bay offense, so to speak, for the entirety of 2023, I'd assume. I really have my doubts about Love. I think he is overhyped and is quite honestly the worst quarterback in this NFC North division. I think the Falcons will be stumped at times by this tough-as-nails Green Bay defense, but will be able to gather together and pick up a win. After starting off the season hot at 2-0, the Falcons move on to play a different NFC North team in the Detroit Lions. The Lions will be hungry for a win up to this point, should be a good team this season, and won't have much issue beating this Falcons team, hopefully. I've got Atlanta losing this one. Week 4 is an equally, if not more difficult matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I don't see Atlanta winning here either. I think Jacksonville will really pull it together in 2023, focus up a little more than they did last season, and really win big. Messing up against the Falcons wouldn't be a good look for the Jags, and I think Calvin Ridley balls out against his former team and forces another Atlanta loss. The Falcons will have an easier game in Week 5 and should get back on track against the Texans here. I think Atlanta will pick up a win in that one before moving on to battle the Washington Commanders in Week 6. The Commanders' defense is a tough unit to go up against, and I feel like Atlanta will struggle in this one to generate many points at all. Desmond Ridder in particular may struggle throughout this game. I have the Falcons losing here. Week 7 should be a win as the Falcons face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then I have the Falcons losing back-to-back games in weeks 8 and 9 as they face the Titans, followed by the Vikings. These are two teams that Atlanta has the capability to beat, but I just don't see it happening this year. Then they get an easy matchup before the bye week against the Cardinals in week 10, which they should win, followed by the bye week in week 11. The Falcons should pick up another win as they take on the Saints at home in week 12. Given an extra week to prepare and rest up, the Falcons should be able to take down New Orleans and get a big win against a competitive division rival. Week 13 is a tough one as Atlanta faces the Jets on the road here, and I don't see them winning unless they intend on pulling an upset win. I think Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets will decimate this team and force a loss. Week 14 should be a win though, as the Falcons have their second game against the Buccaneers, which I have them winning. But in Week 15, I have the Falcons falling to the Carolina Panthers, who will hold home field advantage in this rivalry matchup. I think the Falcons and Panthers are on a similar level of play right now and will split this season. The Falcons then pick up another loss in Week 16 as they face Anthony Richardson and the Indianapolis Colts. I would hope Anthony Richardson has played enough games to gain some serious confidence, and I expect him to play well against Atlanta. While the Falcons are the better team here, I think they'll blow a lead, as they usually do, and choke this game, giving them their 8th loss of the season. The Falcons will bounce back and take down the Bears in Week 17, but will be tasked with quite a challenge in Week 18 as they face the New Orleans Saints again. I think the Falcons and Saints will be neck and neck for a playoff position, and this game will decide who wins the NFC South division. I don't think the Falcons are all that great enough to make it to the playoffs, and I believe the Saints can make the most of this opportunity. I'm not a fan of New Orleans head coach, but I feel with home field advantage and a hunger for the playoffs, the Saints will get it done and force a loss to Atlanta here. With that, the Falcons would narrowly miss a winning season, finishing 20-23 with 8 wins and 9 losses. 8-9 seems like a reasonable record for a Falcons team that I feel needs an upgrade at quarterback and also has some serious blemishes on their defense. I think if the Falcons were to be given another year or two, they could be serious NFC South contenders at the very least. You've been listening to the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department and the Biddle Law Firm. We still have 3 other teams to cover in the NFC South, which is honestly a pretty interesting division. On the off chance that the Buccaneers strike gold with either Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield, this division could get crazy. Because I'm doubtful that happens, there's only 3 relevant teams in this division, 2 of which we have yet to cover. We'll take a peek at the rest of the NFC South coming up right after this.
We're heating up your radio with spicy sports talk. This is the Sideline Sizzle.
Welcome back to the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department and the Biddle Law Firm. We've been covering each NFL team's schedule for the upcoming regular season, diving into one division at a time. For this week's show, we're going game by game for each team in the NFC South. And in the last segment, we covered the Atlanta Falcons. We will resume our 2023 schedule discussions here, starting with the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers are, of course, a regional favorite, but personally, I could care less about this team. I've grown up in the Carolinas my entire life, and let me tell you, the thought of becoming a Panthers fan has simply never crossed my mind. What has crossed my mind several times, though, is how they fell to Peyton Manning and my Denver Broncos back in 2016 during the Super Bowl. Since that day, the Broncos have never recovered, and sadly, neither have the Carolina Panthers, or Cam Newton for that matter, who is unsurprisingly still out of a job. He thinks he can still play, but trust me, I watched him when he was on the Patriots for a brief time, and after that train wreck, he'll never be allowed a job at quarterback in the NFL again. To be fair, he wasn't that bad with the Patriots, but there's a reason they moved on from him. Anyway, on to the Panthers, who hopefully have found their franchise quarterback in Bryce Young. Personally, I'm a Bryce Young believer. I'm rooting for him in 2023, and I think he can be capable of delivering where past quarterbacks couldn't. While at Alabama, Young had to face college football's top players again and again, and in 2022, he did not have a very talented receiving core compared to other SEC teams. Young still delivered an amazing season and should be capable of commanding this Panthers offense. There have been reports of Young being much farther developed than other prospects the NFL has seen in the past. For instance, calling audibles and making changes in the huddle. Most rookies don't do that. Supposedly, Bryce Young is. I think he's got a winning mentality and expects a lot out of the guys around him, so he could not only be a good passer, but a great leader for this team. With all that praise out of the way, this Panthers team does have problems. Their offensive line isn't all that great, but they are young and developing, which is promising. They also have some question marks in their receiving core, some guys who are overdue for a breakout season like Terrace Marshall, and other guys who are seasoned veterans that may regress this year like Adam Thielen. Defensively, I do like this team. I think they have a very talented defense that can not only cause pressure at the quarterback position, but also disrupt the passing game in coverage. But enough chatter about what I like about the team on paper. Do I think the Panthers will do well in 2023? Honestly, I think they'll have some up and downs this season, and Bryce Young will not have as great of a season as some people think. It's his first year, and this team traded away some valuable assets while also signing a ton of free agents, meaning the chemistry from last year has likely been disrupted severely. They look like a totally different offense. In fact, they are a totally different offense in many ways. So I think this will be a learning and developing year for the Panthers. In week 1, I have them losing their opening game to the Falcons. They lost on the road to this team last year, and to open the season, I don't think the Panthers will have found their groove. Week 2 is another loss as they play the Saints, who should be pretty talented this season, and I expect to open the season pretty well. It doesn't get much better than from here, as I also have the Panthers losing the next 4 games as well. In week 3, it's a loss to the Seahawks, who they face on the road, and Seattle is a playoff team that plays well at home, so that's a bit of a given. Week 4, the Panthers will play the Vikings, and while I think they can beat this Minnesota team, I have them falling here. During week 5, they play the Lions on the road and should take another L to a team that is simply better than them in multiple regards. Then, before the week 7 bye week, the Panthers will take another loss to the Dolphins in week 6, who should be a very good team this season as well. It's a tough way to open up their schedule. I mean, going 0-6 is about as bad as it can get. However, I think Frank Reich pulls this team together, they get a little rest over the bye week and have an opportunity to assess the state of the team. I feel like after this point, the Panthers will exit week 7 feeling stronger and ready to be a competitive team that they know they can be. So in week 8, they bounce back with an easy win over the Houston Texans, the storyline here being Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud. Then they'll snag another easy win in week 9 against the Indianapolis Colts, another draft class storyline, as it will be Bryce Young taking on Anthony Richardson. The Panthers will then slip up a bit in weeks 10 and 11 as they take a tough loss to a team they should beat in the Chicago Bears. That game is in Chicago. It'll be chilly up there in the Windy City, and the Bears with Justin Fields will be looking to improve. Also got to mention that DJ Moore, who was traded to the Bears in order to get Bryce Young, will be getting his revenge here. Week 11, the Panthers will face the Dallas Cowboys, which are a playoff caliber team that will likely crush Carolina here. This point in the season is where the Panthers really find their footing, though, and start to play consistent football again. Week 12, I have them beating the Tennessee Titans. The Titans' addition of DeAndre Hopkins does not concern me, but Will Levis could be named the starter at this point, so potentially yet another draft class storyline. Then the Panthers take down the Buccaneers in week 13, but struggle a little bit against the Saints in week 14 and take a loss. They then bounce back in week 15, picking up a win against their rival Atlanta Falcons at home in Charlotte. Week 16 should be another win for them as they take on the Green Bay Packers. In week 17, they suffer their final loss of the season to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence should be playing at his best in hopes of preparing for playoff football. And to close things out in week 18, the Panthers will face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I have them beating easily to finish 2023. I think my prediction for Carolina is a bit harsh as I have them going 7-10 in 2023. In my defense, the NFC South is slowly improving. Their division is neck and neck, and their schedule aside from that isn't the easiest. I'd say Carolina has the potential to hit 9, maybe even 10 wins if Bryce Young really explodes on the scene in 2023. If he has the season I expect him to have starting his career, I'd say the Panthers finish with about 7 wins. This is a team with the potential to take the NFC South by storm, but right now, I think it really belongs to the next team we'll cover, the New Orleans Saints. Yes, I think the Saints do well this year because they finally have a quarterback in Derek Carr. Carr is not perfect by any means, but I think Given the tools he has to work with in New Orleans, they'll win the division. Week 1, they face the Titans, and though I think the Saints do well this year, I actually have them losing this opening game. However, I do think they'll get back on track in Week 2 when they face the Carolina Panthers, as we just discussed. The Panthers aren't likely to have found their groove yet, and I think New Orleans takes advantage of that. They then get 2 more wins in Weeks 3 and 4 as they take on the Packers, followed by the Buccaneers, 2 teams they are very capable of beating. Week 5, I have them losing to the Patriots. I think this will be their first real hiccup aside from the Titans in Week 1. Bill Belichick will have a game plan in place to snag a good win, and with the Patriots' schedule already being tough within their division, they won't waste an opportunity like this. Week 6, the Saints take down the Texans. I doubt Houston is playing at a high level at this point in the season. Then in Week 7, a little bit of an upset win here as the Saints face the Jaguars at home. I think New Orleans shows how well they can do, especially being at home, and the Jaguars are good but not perfect, so the Saints should be able to find holes in their defense to exploit. On that note though, the Saints need to be keen on defense themselves, otherwise this will be a shootout that the Jaguars could potentially end up winning. Now, after 2 good wins, the Saints will get tripped up by the Colts in Week 8. I think if Anthony Richardson is starting here, that he will show up and get his team a good win. And with New Orleans, you just have to account for games where they might not show up. If they had Sean Payton as their head coach, I'd say they would win this game, but I can't even name their head coach's name. And from what I've heard, he isn't that great. The Saints will bounce back in Week 9, as they should take down the Bears, but then I have them losing to Kirk Cousins and the Vikings in Week 10. The Vikings are expected to have a significant drop-off from last season, but there are still aspects of this team that should be able to dissect the Saints here, mostly Justin Jefferson. Now in Week 11, the Saints have a bye week, which would give them time to rest up for their game against the Falcons. Honestly, I don't think the bye week helps them at all, and I have them falling to the Falcons in Week 12, followed by the Lions in Week 13. The Falcons will be a tricky road opponent, and the Lions are just a good team, so I think New Orleans struggles here. Then the Saints sort of rebound against the Panthers before taking another loss in Week 15 to the New York Giants. The Giants put pressure on Derek Carr, and with the Saquon situation somewhat ironed out, they'll be good to go for hopefully a nice season in 2023. Week 16, New Orleans will play the Rams and get a good win, but then they lose a bit of a shocker to the Buccaneers late in Week 17. This would put them in a situation where they need to win in order to win the division. So, in Week 18, for a tough game against the Falcons, I have the Saints winning and coming up big. Now, this game wouldn't be huge if the Saints end up sweeping the Buccaneers, but this team isn't perfect, and I expect them to make mistakes here and there. I think that will reflect in their record as well, as I have them going 9-8 in 2023, good enough for a winning season, but I'm not sure how consistently this team can perform. If Derek Carr truly is the difference maker, this team could pick up as many as 11, potentially even 12 wins. For 2023, I see them lingering around that 9 or 10 win range with a floor of about 7 wins. I do like New Orleans with their roster right now. Hopefully Alvin Kamara is able to come back. Right now it looks pretty grim with whatever lawsuit he's dealing with. There's also concerns with Michael Thomas staying healthy and concerns with the offensive line as well. Defensively, this team has regressed severely from a few years ago, but they've still got pieces in place. Cameron Jordan off the edge, Marshawn Lattimore there at corner. There's hope for this team for sure. The Saints, they've got some big playmakers on their roster, and winning the NFC South this season would be good for them, assuming my prediction is correct. The final team we'll look at is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. After Tom Brady retired, I know this team will just fall apart. Even with Brady, they looked pretty awful, and I think his absence is the final nail in the coffin for the Bucs. Unless you think Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield takes his place, I think the Buccaneers are a serious contender for the number 1 overall pick in the draft. It was a fun ride for them, but their days of contention are over once again. I wasn't generous with this team, and just to speed things up, I'll only list out the games that I have them winning. Don't worry, it really isn't that many. In Week 1, I have them losing to the Vikings, but picking up a win in Week 2 against the Bears. They then go on a 6-game losing streak until Week 10 when they play the Titans at home. I think the Buccaneers will have bright moments this season, hidden within lengthy periods of bad play. And in Week 10, I think they can deal with the Titans. Then, the Bucs go on another 6-game losing streak until Week 17 when they play the Saints. Like I mentioned just a moment ago, this game is considered an upset win in my eyes, and I honestly wouldn't guarantee anything here. They would then close out the season in Week 18 with a loss to the Carolina Panthers, finishing their season with just 3 wins and 14 losses. Sheesh. I know it's harsh and quite rough, but I'm taking everything into context here. Brady is gone, they had a bad year last year and didn't get much better, and with Todd Bowles head coaching this team, expect nothing but the worst for 2023. And with that, we have covered the entirety of the NFC South. Based on my predictions, that would put the Saints in first place with a 9-8 record, followed by the Falcons, Panthers, and then the Buccaneers coming in last place. I think the NFC South may be one of the worst divisions in football right now, but it is getting better, and teams like Atlanta and Carolina have somewhat bright futures ahead of them. That's all we've got for this week's show, though. Thanks for tuning in as you've been listening to the Sideline Sizzle, brought to you by the City of Conway Parks and Recreation Department and the Biddle Law Firm. We'll catch you next week.